King of Podcasts proudly presents The Broadcasters Podcast, a weekly media commentary talking about traditional and digital media headlines and talking to the content creators out front and behind the scenes. Here is the King of Podcasts. Welcome to episode 106 of the Broadcasters Podcast here. BroadcastersPodcast.com. Thank you for being here. Great show tonight. We're back with interviews here on the program. And let me give you a little heads up of who we're going to have on the program tonight. I'll be joined in part one of an interview that I had with entertainment and culture expert Joanna Dodd-Massey. She is a C-level executive and management consultant who has served as in-house communications counsel for more than 25 years in the media and digital technology space. She's worked at companies like Condé Nast, which is huge for magazines and publications, Lionsgate, the big film company, Discovery, Hasbro, CBS, and Viacom. She's even run cable networks herself. She also currently handles global brand reputation management, crisis communications, and culture transformation. I talked to her specifically about the digital disruption in terms of the evolution from where shows are being added into the cable lineups and to the network lineups as how they're being now pitched and moved over and being launched in the streaming media space. We're going to talk all about that because she was very much involved in the early days of digital change when it comes to the thought of how programming should be absorbed in the early days of the internet in terms of video content being taken in. We talk all about that on the program. Now, again, two-part interview, an hour-long interview I did here with Joanna. It was a great interview. Loved it. We're going to definitely try to work on bringing her back because there's just so much more in the digital space that we could talk about. She really had so much to offer in terms of that. We'll talk about that. A couple of stories I want to bring up also on the program. Agency, more Hollywood labor dispute stuff, as there are some direct deals being signed by agencies with the Writers Guild. Direct one-on-one agency deals. We're going to bring up a couple of those that happened over the weekend and this week, and we'll leave it right there. And then we'll also have another interesting story, and I think this is really something to think about as we're looking at several albums that are coming out to the Billboard Hot 100 into the mainstream space next week. One of those that's coming out is from Mac Miller. You might remember the rapper who recently he committed suicide last year after some long issues he had. You might also remember that he was dating and had a long-term relationship with Ariana Grande a while back as well. So there's a story that came out from Rolling Stone. We can't have all our artists die. How the music industry is fighting the mental health crisis. I think this is very important for all of us to take a look at as well. But tonight, I'm going to continue on radio because a few things happened here that I thought were really important. First off, payola. Now, we've talked about this going on. We know that back in September of last year, 2019, we mentioned here on the Broadcasters Podcast how the FCC reached out to the Recording Industry Artists Association of America, the artists. They are reaching out to confront over payola allegations. So the FCC is now in the fight of the payola problem at the hands of major music publishers. So here's what's going on here. The commissioner, Mike O'Rielly, demanded now in the recent news that Sony Music, Universal Music Group, UMG, Warner Media Group, I believe they're both media groups. Sony Music, or Sony in general, Universal Music Group, and Warner Music Group, the three of the top main publishers in the world of all that underhold a good monopoly of record labels throughout the country. When there used to be all these different record labels that were fighting with each other to go and put music out, no, they're under all these umbrellas of corporate publishers. So the corporate publishers now have to answer to new pay-to-play allegations. So the commissioner wrote this recently, and this is what he said, quote, while the RIAA response was appreciated, RIAA claimed that it was not in a position to survey its members' anti-payola practices and submit responses collectively. So the RIAA, once confronted by the FCC, pushed back. They said, we can't get you the information you need right away. Not in a position, they said. Instead, It recommended I reach out directly to each of you to gain insight into what processes your company has in place to ensure compliance with federal legal provisions. This letter is intended for that purpose. For O'Rielly, he also said, quote, even the most cursory review of consumer complaints and assertions provides cause for concern regarding the persistence of payola. And in recent months, some artists have responded forcefully against accusations of payola, which speaks to the seriousness of the issue. Yet there is no shortage of no shortage of accusations that financial enticement is in some cases driving chart rankings, album and song sales, and commercial success. Leave that right there. What is there to be held? Why is the RIAA, why are these independent, these big corporate publishers, why are they not responding back to the FCC, a governing body that is governing over them? Why are they not responding back? The payola problem is real. We have seen the story called out here. It is happening. Now, moving to a story from radioinc.com. This letter that I just read, Commissioner O'Rielly is saying that he wants answers about how they are preventing payola. He wants their answers by the end of February. So he's on it now. He wants to know if they understand the rules against payola and if there are any initial steps that need to be taken to prevent the practice from happening. So again, we talked about this. Rolling Stone brought up the story back in August, saying that there was a strong hint that the practice was still taking place all over the country. The article quotes one music industry executive saying he was paid $50,000 to play a song 800 times on his station. So there we go. The problem has come once again. This is important. As a reminder, payola is the lack of a sponsorship ID for money, service, or other valuable in consideration received in exchange of the broadcast for any matter. According to Section 317 of the Communications Act, it requires a sponsorship announcement if programming is broadcast in exchange for any money, service, or valuable consideration, and the rules expand upon a broadcaster's sponsorship identification responsibilities with specific requirements for political and issue-oriented matter and gives exceptions for commercial products and one-ad types of announcements. I want to know what's going to go on right here because I'm telling you, this is important. People need to understand that the independent artists that are out there, we talked about it last week. Why is it that Old Town Road, a song that was 19 weeks at number one? Why is it that two of the top radio stations that are iHeartMedia owned, they played the song significantly less than all the other top 40 radio stations out there? There is a true ceiling going on. There is corruption among the radio stations. The music labels are having to do what they have to do to get their music out there. So, of course, payola is getting into play. And only the largest size publishers can do that. The larger labels can do that. The independents are being left out. If you're going to go ahead and have these stations get paid, that's one thing. Because remember, the reason that the radio stations never got paid is because the extra revenue that used to be made was by payola. The DJs, the program directors, they used to get paid for putting songs on the air. And you know what? If that was the case, I don't mind that so much. But when you're doing this in a corporate level and not everybody has an even playing field, there's something wrong with this. There's something definitely wrong with this. And I really am upset by it. And this is, again, the issues with radio. Now, I talked about in a very lengthy segment on my When I'm Not Podcasting segment, which you can find on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/jbrasco951. You can find it there. I did a story which referred to a story from radioinside.com. Lance Venta wrote about the changes that were being done at iHeartMedia as a result of the layoffs. Why were the layoffs being done? And I explained in that story everything that went down to that when it comes to adding artificial intelligence, buying software, buying programming, the programmatic software, all the things they have from Cat's Media to Jelly to Profit to what they have now for artificial intelligence. They want to get rid of all the talent. They want to be able to control the programming at the national level. They want the engineering, the IT, all being done at the national level. They do not want the local stations to have any autonomy. The program directors may suggest adding or removing songs, but they must play the charts. They must play the playlists as directed by Der Kommissar, iHeartMedia in San Antonio, Texas. The regional directors, there's not even a regional base where there's a little bit of autonomy or a little bit of a middleman. No, it's all being controlled in one nucleus. That's it. One place gets to say what the entire nation gets to hear on 800 some odd radio stations around the country. Ridiculous. Thus destroying local radio. So if you want to hear that story, you can actually go and look for that. Actually, I have it on audio and video. Go ahead and look on the broadcasterspodcast.com website. You'll find the link for when I'm not podcasting. Look for it, download it, subscribe to the show right there, or just look for it on the YouTube channel, because I also put this show every week on YouTube as well, along with the When I'm Not podcasting program and my Wrestling is Real wrestling podcast program. It's all there. Now, that said, another story coming out about local radio and the issues of corporate chain ownership, which is being said here by a reporter for WGBH, the NPR station, or the PBS station in Boston. Well, actually, they're both NPR and PBS stations, have the same call letters, WGBH, legendary radio station. Dan Kennedy wrote a very interesting story, and I want to just take some time and read it because it really is, it's not overly long, but I think some of the things they talk about here is very valid. And I'm glad somebody is out there talking about local radio and talking about the issues here. So this is what Dan Kennedy wrote a couple days ago. Local radio, now the article, by the way, is called Local Radio Follows Local Newspapers Down the Drain of Corporate Chain Ownership. And here's what he says. Local radio stations, like local newspapers, are under siege. Newspapers are struggling because the internet undermined the value of advertising and because social media proved more alluring than the latest goings-on at City Hall. Likewise, radio is fighting to be heard in an audioscape increasingly dominated by streaming services and podcasts. But radio and newspapers have something else in common. Corporate greed is making their problems much worse and preventing the kind of investments that are needed to position them for the future. And that's the whole point. The wrong people are invested in these radio stations. As I said, if there was a chance to get the higher frequency, the more attractive frequencies with the better signals and the better towers available, if you could get those stations available. It's not like local radio programs could not come up with the money to buy a station. But those are few and far between because of the foothold that iHeartMedia has. Now, in this story, the latest assault on the public interest arrived last week in the form of massive cuts by iHeartMedia, which owns more than 850 radio stations around the country, including 9 in the Boston, Massachusetts area. We know about the story of the bankruptcy, and currently they are under the control, as the Wall Street Journal's Ann Steele reported, under lenders and bondholders led by Franklin Advisors, Inc. It used to be Bain Capital and Thomas H. Lee Partners, which were an equity firm. Franklin Advisors, same damn thing. In other words, iHeart these days is a financial gambit more than it is a media company. And so it was hardly a surprise when the company cut hundreds of jobs. Now, Scott Feibush of Northeast Radio Watch wrote that he's heard estimates ranging from 300 to 1,200. The cuts would be accompanied by an increased reliance on national programming and artificial intelligence. They talk about what happened in Boston itself. We're going to move along to that. And here is, again, what I talked about on this program last week when I went into my little special report, the whole story about how radio has gone down the tubes. Again, the road to radio ruin. This is according to Dan Kennedy, and he's just basically repeating what I've said. The road to radio ruin began with one giant leap, the Telecommunications Act of 1996, a bipartisan monstrosity that removed any meaningful caps on ownership. Previously, Congress and the FCC strictly limited the number of stations someone could both control nationally and in a given market, which meant that most stations operated under local ownership. And that's exactly right. Now, they move along and talk about the destruction of newspapers, like the demise of local radio stations has been underway for at least a generation. And they talk about the newspapers. We'll leave that alone to that. He ends up and says, so what is to be done about the perilous state of local radio stations and newspapers? Ideally, wealthy business interests and nonprofit foundations would get together and take their media back from the corporations. Since those corporations are clearly in the media business for short-term profits, at some point in the next few years, they may be willing to sell. Perhaps Congress could provide them with tax incentives to make it beneficial for them to do so, and disincentives if they don't. The alternative is a world without local journalism, giving rise to ignorance, corruption, and the decline of civic life. Amen, Den Kennedy. Well done. Well said. He's absolutely right. Now, I disagree with the need that there needs to be wealthy business interests and nonprofit foundations, because we don't need more corporate in here. We need to be able to have companies that are available to go ahead and buy these stations back. But iHeartMedia must, in the good of the public, for the airways of the American public, the listeners, for the good of the listeners, and for good for the public, I forget what I always call that. Really, for the good of the public, they need to go and have iHeartMedia. If they're going to be stuck with bankruptcy, then where's the FTC? Where is the FCC? Why aren't they going after these companies? If they're not able to come up with their bills, then they must divest. They must let go what they cannot own, what they cannot hold. They are not supposed to be given a pass after the bankruptcy to continue to work in debt and to continue to go ahead and run their operation, making major cuts, taking away jobs, taking away careers. It's not fair. You know what? If you're going to run a company, you run a company to build a profit. You do not run a company under this junk bond equity group bullshit. It's not right. So no, Congress doesn't need to provide tax incentives. They might be able to do that because it might help. Only if they're able to go and get these stations out of the grubby hands of these these private equity partners. If it gets them to go ahead and bail out, that wouldn't be a bad idea, but they're not going to do that, unfortunately. They don't want to do that. And it's really a shame. Oh, well. Anyway, thank you, Dan Kennedy, for that. Very well said in the story. So stand by. Coming up. Again, I'm going to go ahead and bring up my interview with Joanna Dodd-Massey, entertainment and culture expert. I have that coming up a little bit later on for all of you to listen to. But first, I also want to go and remind all of you that there are a couple ways to go and help out this radio show and help out yours truly, King of Podcasts, in the process. There is a Cash App link if you would like to go ahead and provide a little donation to the cause for all the work I do to go and put all this great information together. The Cash App is King of All Podcasts. And if you want to, also have a PayPal link, paypal.me/King of Podcasts. That information is at King of Pod. It's me at broadcasterspodcast.com. And I also have a link for all of you to go ahead and check out, where if you want to go ahead and buy a little something through Amazon and go through my special link, which will allow me to commission for any sales made through Amazon. That's kingofamazon.com. Again, kingofamazon.com. The best way to go and help out this radio show, so we can always put money back in to put more into the product. Again, I'm always working on things to put more content out. I'm doing a lot more YouTube videos. I'm doing more content when it comes to the radio shows. And I'd love to be able to go and do more content here. Again, there's a lot of work that gets done in this show. All the links to all the news articles I bring up on the show, I put them here on the Facebook page at facebook.com/King of Podcasts. And you can also follow me on Twitter at King of Podcasts. I also put it there as well. So you can have all that for you to go and check out for yourselves. A couple other stories I want to get to before we get to Joanna Dodd-Massey. The Writers Guild of America. Well, they are cutting deals. While we're still waiting for something to happen with the Association of Talent Agencies, well, we're not going to worry about that because we have, either which way, other companies that are ready not to go and worry about the Writers Guild not getting people to go to work through them. So we now have companies doing this. Here we go. Gersh, it's a large talent agency. They have reached an agreement with the Writers Guild of America, according to the Hollywood Reporter. Now, this was last week. Now, their clients include Adam Driver and Patricia Arquette, and they have come to terms with the union, which, along with them, has a growing list of agencies that have decided to also sign straight-on deals with the Writers Guild of America. That is Verve, Kaplan Stoller, Culture Creative Entertainment, Buchwald, Abrams, and Rothman Brecker. So Gersh will resume representing WGA members effective immediately. And the co-presidents David Gersh and Bob Gersh said this: writers are vital to our industry, and Gersh has a long and proud history representing them. We are deeply committed to our writers and their interests and appreciate their patience and look forward to resuming our work on their behalf. So as we know, the franchise agreement after 42 years expired between the Writers Guild of America and the Association of Talent Agents, as the two entities cannot come to terms over a new deal, and members were instructed to leave their agencies. A mass exodus of 7,000 writers industry-wide overnight. Again, as we know, the WGA's problem is that they wanted the Association of Talent Agents to adhere to a new code of conduct which compels signatories to refrain from taking any compensation beyond commission, which is prohibiting the charging of packaging fees. And by the way, Joanna will talk about this on the interview. I don't forget if it's on this episode or on the next episode, but keep that in mind. As well as having corporate affiliations with any production entities. These two conditions, especially the latter, primarily affect the three biggest agencies, which is WME, which sprang out of Endeavor Content, CAA with their affiliated production arm WHIP, and the UTA, which has set up Civic Center Media as a joint content TV venture with the Hollywood Reporter parent company Valence Media. So there's that. Then another agency just recently also signed, and that is the APA. The APA stands for the Agency for the Performing Arts. It's one of the most diversified talent agencies and based in Los Angeles, headquarters in LA, New York, Nashville, Atlanta, Toronto, and London. So at this point, looking at the agencies that are out there and going back to a 2015 story which gave real information about the agencies and what the Writers Guild is working with so far. The APA, they service 3,400 clients, 325 employees, 210 agents, and 15 managing partners. Signature clients at that time included Gary Oldman, Gina Rodriguez, and Wesley Snipes, plus comedians Louis C.K., Amy Schumer, and Kevin Hart. Gersh, as we mentioned before, Adam Driver, Patricia Arquette, Kristen Stewart, Kyle Chandler, J.K. Simmons, Taylor Schilling have all been signature clients of that firm. Meanwhile, the major agencies that have not done anything yet, we mentioned is WME, which is 4,000 plus clients, 5,000 employees almost, 200 agencies in 25 countries, which was originally founded with the takeover of William Morris by upstart Endeavor. Originally was IMG. The UTA, 3,000 clients, 500 employees, and then CAA, which we're talking about Michael Elvis here on this program, about 5,000 clients, 1,500 employees. That's where we are with all this here. So, again, there are some people trying to cut deals with the Writers Guild, which I don't know if that's going to help anything more for everybody else when it comes to trying to get some interest in trying to get the writers this original agreement back on board, to try to get the packaging out of the way, to get the code of conduct back into play, and to get the franchise agreement back into play. But obviously, people see this is not going to happen right away. So we're going to have to wait and, again, find out if anything's going to happen, if we're going to have some rolling over of this ATA-WGA franchise agreement issue. If this is not being resolved when it rolls over into the AMPTP, if it rolls over into SAG-AFTRA and others, they're all going to get affected by it. We're going to keep an eye on it. And when there's more news about it, you'll hear it right here on the show. One last thing I want to talk about before we wrap things up and we go right into our interview with Joanna Dodd Massey is the story from Rolling Stone magazine. Nicole Freshy writes about how musicians suffer from addiction and mental health issues at an alarming rate. But with a new wave of initiatives and organizations seeking to help, the industry is taking action like never before. In a 2018 study from the Music Industry Research Association, 50% of musicians reported battling symptoms of depression, compared with less than 25% of the general adult population. There 12% reported having suicidal thoughts, nearly 4 times the general population. And then a 2019 study published by Swedish digital distribution platform Record Union said the numbers were even worse. 73% of independent musicians they found had battled stress, anxiety, and depression. So album sales continue to fall. Record labels and digital distributors gobble up the majority of streaming revenue, and artists essentially have no choice but to tour more and more. Aside from financial instability, all kinds of stressors accompany this literal gig economy: loneliness, being surrounded by drugs and alcohol, strain in relationships, poor sleeping and eating habits, lack of access to quality health insurance and care, and so on. While top-tier musicians are not immune to these problems, they tend not to be the ones hardest hit, at least when it comes to financial health and healthcare issues. For every artist, according to Dr. Chayman Newman, a Toronto-based clinical psychologist whose private practice focuses on performers and touring artists, she said, "What's more, performing can throw an artist's bodily systems out of whack. With the pressure and rush of the stage, artists are in this ramped-up sympathetic activation mode. It almost looks like the equivalent of a panic state, except it's being induced by voluntary circumstances." So some of the things we've seen over the last decade, we had, in 2019, Silver Jews, David Berman, guitarist Neil Casal, Yonder Mountain String Band founder Jeff Austin, Prodigy singer Keith Flint. They all died by suicide. 2017-2018, rapper Mac Mills suffered an accidental drug overdose. Superstars DJ Avicii, Soundgarden's Chris Cornell, and Linkin Park's Chester Bennington all died by suicide. Now, the music industry is taking action to address the growing mental health crisis. New initiatives are popping up from corporate giants and grassroots organizations, festivals and benefits being planned to raise awareness of mental health, and efforts by record labels and artists to destigmatize mental illness. And artists like Bruce Springsteen, Justin Bieber, Lizzo, Demi Lovato are increasingly opening up about their own mental health struggles. Recording Academy has Music Cares to lend medical and financial help, but recently their resources for musicians have exploded. They said, quote, "We've lost so many artists that industry leaders are finally paying attention. They're realizing we can't have all artists die." And this is according to the founder of the Warped Tour, Kevin Lyman, who's now a professor at the University of Southern California's Music School and a longtime mental health advocate. Now, they go through several stories about people that have gone through different issues with mental health, and they go through all that. So here's some of the examples we have right now. Sully Erna of Godsmack debuted the SCARS Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to mental health education. Veteran jam band Widespread Panic held a ticket raffle, bringing in $100,000 for a suicide prevention organization called Nucci Space. And Billie Eilish started in the PSA to share her battles with depression and urged those who are struggling to ask for help. So there's a lot that being done out there. Very important. And for those of you out there, again, watch the environment that you're in. If you're getting into the music industry, that it is a gig economy. They're not wrong about that. The music labels, again, it's the corporate culture. And really, when you see that artists are not coming out with album after album after album, if you even get the chance to have a multi-record deal, I don't know if that even happens anymore. But the investment into artists for long-term careers, it's not happening as much. We see how rappers are out there in the same way, you know. It's the care and content of these people that people need to be wary of and need to be cognizant of. So I appreciate the story being told there, and hopefully things are being done more to help out in that phase. So anyway, it's time for me to go ahead and segue us into our interview segment. Again, entertainment and culture expert Joanna Dodd Massey joins me here on the Broadcasters Podcast. Here's part one of my conversation. So it is time once again here on the Broadcasters Podcast to begin interviewing some top-level professionals in the media space. And at this point, I've been looking to secure some interviews with executives that are very well-rounded in the broadcasting space in terms of television, cable, and now streaming media, satellite, if you will, because of the digital disruption. As we've seen, now obviously Netflix, Hulu, Amazon are some of the major portals that have really taken a lock into the space right now. Obviously, Netflix is doing the most. A lot of money being spent on content as well. But what's happening is, obviously, we've seen a number of new players coming into the space, and it's really a fight to find out what's going to happen and who will stand, who actually will stand in this entire race to really take on the people that are cutting cords in the cable and looking for different options when they're looking online for content, where they're going to go and who they want to be aligned and loyal to. Where are they going to be spending their hard-earned dollars? With that said, my my first guest here on the Broadcasters Podcast for this year holds a PhD and an MBA. She is a C-suite executive and management consultant who has served as in-house communications counsel for more than 25 years in the media and digital technology industries with companies such as Condé Nast, Lionsgate, Discovery, Hasbro, CBS, and Viacom. Now, those are some heavy hitters right there. She also handles global brand reputation management, crisis communications, and culture transformation. A well-sought individual I am talking about, entertainment and culture expert Joanna Dodd Massey, who is also the author of Culture Shock, Surviving 5 Generations in One Workplace. She also is founder of J.D. Massey Associates, a governance strategy and communications firm focused on corporate brand risk and reputation management. Now, Joanna, I understand if that was a handful, but obviously you have all those accolades. They have to be noticed. Thanks for being on.
Thank you. It did sound like a mouthful, but thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And it's really to go ahead and encompass what you're able to offer in terms of, really for me, as a fact-finding mission. I mean, as I've talked about on the program, I've been able to go ahead and be enveloped into certain areas of music, movies, TV, and radio in my career, in newspapers, as is. So my thing is, I've always had the curiosity, but of course, a program that can go into issues like this, where I don't see a whole lot. There are people talking about it and telling stories, but to encompass it all together and to talk about it without feeling like I need to go ahead and ruffle any feathers or be worried about, well, where's my next job going to be? Because I'm independent now where I'm in the space, so I can ask these questions. And I appreciate you taking some time to talk to me about this area. Now, media-wise, let's talk about you and your background, your career, to really give some real perspective of how important you've been in the broadcasting space. You were, at one point, Senior VP of Corporate Communications and Publicity at the Hub Network, which was a very interesting channel. I actually enjoyed the idea of the concept. You were also, at one point, Senior VP Communications on the West Coast for CBS. You were Lead Media Relations Executive for CBS's digital media ventures, which included CBS Mobile, CBS.com. You were also Senior VP of Media Relations at UPN, which we now know as CW. And you were responsible for overseeing internal and external communications of the network. So you obviously have been around and you have now been a part to see the change in the environment. So the early stages of the digital disruption, you were part of that movement. What can you tell me about what you've seen in those early stages and what we're seeing evolve today?
Thank you. Well, part of what you didn't get into, because it's so far back in my resume, I don't even know if it's on my bio anymore. I started at CBS at the television network as a publicist. And back then, it was a 4 broadcast network universe. We didn't even have the UPN and the WB. They came along a little later. And so I saw that transformation, and then I went to work for a production company, and suddenly the internet became a thing. And I don't know if you remember the famous clip. I think it was
the
Katie
Today
Couric
Show, right?
and yes, saying, and it was Katie and Al, and they're like, "What's the internet?" And they call out to their producer, "Can you tell us again what the internet is?" It's a hysterical clip. And I was around for that era, and I was working at a production company, and this internet thing happened, and all of a sudden, we had a whole bunch of .com companies, looking for content online. And I, at the time, was running PR and marketing, and I got put in charge of new business development. And essentially what that meant was I met with all these .com companies. This was in the 1990s. Yeah. And talked to them about giving them our content. Like, we had all these TV shows we had produced. The problem was they all wanted it for free, right? There were no advertising on the internet at that point, and nobody was going to pay to watch TV on, what at the time was a flip phone, maybe a BlackBerry. These are small screens, and the iPad didn't exist. So anyhow, it doesn't take a business genius to figure out that there's no business in giving away your product for free. So,
but it was a time also where the technology wasn't able to go and stand up to being able to stream as such a good quality, because even at the time, we hadn't even gotten to high definition television yet, but that was in the middle of being developed, correct? Right.
And we were still in dial-up back then. So you're right. It would have been horrific. it was a challenging time, and the people who were in that space, that with me, we were thinking way ahead of ourselves. We eventually got there, but we were not there in 1998, 99. The dot bomb happened on Wall Street. Every company that I ever spoke to in that era went away. And I ended up at UPN, and I watched the younger generations, at the time it was millennials, really abandon television. And it wasn't so much that they weren't watching. There were two issues happening. One is they weren't being measured by Nielsen. And the second thing was they weren't getting their information from newspapers and magazines. Like, they weren't getting their information in the traditional way. And blogging was becoming a thing, and social media wasn't even a big thing yet. Facebook didn't come around till 2004. And even then it started in colleges. So, I really sort of started to see that shift. And you mentioned the Hub Network, and that's when it really took hold. We knew that the Hub Network launched on 10/10/10, right? So October 10th of 2010. By the time it shut down, which was October, it was the end of October of 2014. So almost 4 years to the day that it closed down. In that 4 years, the business model changed dramatically because Netflix started making TV shows. They were dropping them, in bundles. They're dropping them in one big huge swath instead of putting them out over 1 week at a time. They had at that point amassed everybody's content so that companies like ours, which were running original TV series at the time, we were running things like My Little Pony, but the owner of that content was not us. It was Hasbro. Hasbro was the producer because My Little Pony is a Hasbro intellectual property. It's their IP. And so Hasbro was selling
time as well, because there was, in the 80s, you had a lot of products that were based off of, toy products that were adapted for animation. And the idea of, I can remember that going back years ago. And it was really tough to go and really just try to, I can only imagine with the Hub Network, to try to get to that audience. I mean, Cartoon Network had already kind of carved themselves out a notch. Saturday morning television has been obsolete. And just trying to find a way to draw the audience into new networks and get them to adapt. I mean, there was a lot of things with the Hub Network I noticed where, much like other cable networks, you have to have something to kind of build off of where you don't have all that content ready to go. You had to take some older content. So I remember seeing reruns of Alf and certain older shows like that from the 80s that were to kind of accompany to get a bit of a primetime lineup, to get people to watch the channel, notice the channel's there, and to be ready for original content to come into play, because every channel had to do a certain route there, get their original content going, and then start building on top of that. And everybody at that point in the late 2000s to in the early 2000s, early 2010s, that's what I started seeing a lot of, is that every channel had to build their own original content, but they had to start from someplace. And Hub, I don't know if they ever got a real chance to get off the ground.
Well, and it didn't. And what you're talking about is that classic Nickelodeon Nick at Night, right? That format, right? It was brilliant, right? You bring in stuff from the 80s and 90s, you get the families in there, it's family-friendly programming, you promote the cartoons during the day, and then you get the kids back in during the day.
Yeah.
And it works. The problem with what happened for the Hub was that when it launched on 10/10/10, that business model was perfectly okay. Less than 4 years later, it had completely erupted because of Netflix, because you could see My Little Pony on the Hub, but if you waited just a little bit, like 6 weeks, I think, I can't remember the timeline, you could see it on Netflix without commercials. And I remember one of our executives saying to me once, and it was the moment you have as an executive where you go, oh my gosh, the writing's on the wall. The executive had a young child, and he was telling me a story about how his wife and he had left I think the kid was 4 or 5, up in their bedroom, and he was watching TV, and all of a sudden the kids started to cry, and they went running upstairs. I'm like, gosh, what's wrong? Is everything okay? And he's like pointing at the TV set going, make it go away. It was a commercial. They didn't have him on Netflix. And he's like, we're training these kids not to watch commercials. And I thought, oh my gosh. The traditional cable model will eventually die out because someday that 5-year-old will be 15 and 25 and 35. But the network I specifically work for in this moment is in a little bit of trouble because our target was 6 to 11.
Right. And I'm also, the other thing too was that with Discovery Networks, I don't think they were really much into, they really never delved so much into children's programming, I think, at that point. I just felt like they inherited a channel that was a family channel before and said, okay, let's go ahead and try to get something similar for them, put their own spin on it, and try to go that route. And I don't know if that was the right place to go, but I appreciate the ambition for it because there was room in the market to bring more programming in. But like you said, Netflix started putting it, and obviously it's just like any other disruption where, the networks, they might be providing some of this programming over, which, Netflix has taken advantage of for years, having shows like Seinfeld or The Office or whatnot, and not getting companies like NBC that, took all the work to go and produce this content. They might have gotten all the money off the syndication, but the syndication now is getting shattered because now all that content is going to get repurposed towards these new companies that are coming in. Originally, it was Netflix that will be the spot to go. But now all the individual networks are going to start doing the same thing. So it's the place to put that programming. It's not going to get seen. So all that older programming might not have a place to go anymore because I think it's going to also get lost in that as well.
I think actually you will see all of it on individual over the top, what we call over the top channels or OTT channels, which are things like HBO Now, CBS All Access, NBC's Peacock, which is coming out in April, I believe. Apple TV. Like the old program, these channels have an insatiable appetite for filling up their programming, right? They need hundreds and hundreds of hours of programming to make it worthwhile for the consumer to pay out their $5.99, $9.99, $14.99, whatever it is, every month. So I believe that those shows will absolutely last and find a home. I think the challenge for the consumer, and that means the business challenge for us, which the industry will eventually figure out, is discoverability. How do you know where it is, and how do you find it, right? So that's the challenge there. It used to be for a brief period that it was all on Netflix because all the networks were gladly, and studios were like, yes, here, please. I mean, Netflix was paying good money, right, and real dollars. And so I remember Leslie Moonves, who's the chairman of CBS, saying at an investor conference once, we happily receive our multi-million-dollar check every quarter from Netflix, But at a certain point, the networks woke up and said, whoa, wait a second. We are providing them with the powder for the gun that is then taking down our business. And they all started to pull back. There's a few things that the networks and also cable outlets, they're still holding on to. I mean, the live sports is still there. There are certain programs that are just legacy that have, that came from before that, are just daily programs. You can't put that onto, the streaming services either. So, I mean, it's an on-demand society. There are still things that can be live, real-time, and current, and they don't have to be episodical. And they can run one show at a time, and you catch what you can. There's still a room for content to be on cable and network and broadcast. That all is there. But for me, that's where the focus needs to be more. So my thing is, do you think it's going to be a point where I guess primetime might just let themselves go? Because the networks right now, cable is doing so much with original content because they're building it of their own. They're still creating relevancy because of, binge watching is still something that certain people do. There's still a couple million people that will watch a particular show every given week, whether it's HGTV or whether it's Food Network. They can still hold on because there's just there are some nooks and crannies, and I think kids' TV is the same way. There are spots where you can still hold on the programming and build off of that, but it's like you said, there are certain areas that Netflix was just kind of running them over the coals, and the networks did not realize, and the studios did not realize what they were letting Netflix get away with. Interestingly, some of them did. David Zaslav, who's the CEO of Discovery, and I worked for David, and he's a brilliant visionary. I've actually been fortunate to work for a lot of visionaries, but and David was one of the early ones to say, don't you realize what we're doing here? Like we at Discovery aren't going to do it. And he got criticized for that in the early days, and you know, in the end ends up looking like a genius because he doesn't have these agreements with, you know, Netflix where he has to, like Disney, where they weren't able to get some of their content until a specific time because there was an agreement in place with Netflix, and they couldn't pull the content off Netflix yet. You know, and slowly but surely those agreements are ending, and so Disney is getting its own content back. But you said something interesting. You mentioned prime time, and I just wanted to say that, you know, prime time is, it barely exists. You know, it's a relic of the past, and it will be gone shortly, in my opinion. I was just recently head of communications at Condé Nast Entertainment. Condé Nast is a traditional publishing house, right? Vogue, Vanity Fair, The New Yorker, Wired, GQ, Bon Appetit.
Huge magazines, yes.
Huge. Everyone thinks they're in the magazines business. They're actually in the video business. They produce 4,000 videos a year that get 12 billion views. Okay. The video side, which is I was on the television, film, and video side of the business. It's massive and it's growing exponentially. And we do a lot of research because video and digital viewing is all about data. And we do a lot of research. And there was a research report that came out while I was there that said that millennials and Gen Z spend 3 hours a day minimum watching content on their phone. That's the new prime time.
I want to take a point and spin off of that because, first of all, it's the purposing of that content. Because, I mean, I see exactly what you're talking about when it comes to Vogue and Vanity Fair, and just where they are creating really slick, well-produced content that is multi-purpose, whether it's something that you might see on an Instagram feed, Instagram TV, or you might see it on somebody's smart TV. Because I know there's a couple of services that, you know, they offer the same kind of a feel like a cable platform, almost like a Pluto TV. But I know there's one called Zumo. And if I'm correct, I think all those Condé Nast services, all their channels, you know, you can flip to those channels that are just streaming 24 hours worth of that content. Whatever is new, it just gets put to a rotation and looped around. And you can see all these different things that are not necessarily all, you know, full-fledged, you know, full-length programming, 30 minutes, 60 minutes long, 5, 7, 10 minutes. There might just be interviews. There might be tutorials. There might be just something that just the informational kind of feel. I've seen all of that, and there's a lot of places to catch that, whether it can be repurposed through social media as well. I want to ask about this now. You handled the corporate turnaround that you just mentioned at Condé Nast, transition from print to digital video. So I want to ask you about this. Now, Neiman Lab, they reported on the state of digital media. They said this, quote, 2019 was a grim year for the business and news, but we also have a growing number of different examples from different countries demonstrating that it's possible to build different kinds of sustainable businesses around different kinds of digital journalism. Given the headlines of layoffs and unions being created across the country from different digital news outlets, I'm sure at Condé Nast, some of those kind of issues might have been brought up, or you might have seen them from, you know, competition that's out there. How are you looking at the space now and the disruptions being done as a result there?
I think that companies like Condé Nast, and I can't speak for Hearst and Meredith, but I can speak for Condé. And, you know, Condé was really smart, in my opinion, because they saw this coming. And back in, I think it was 2013, they started to get into digital video because they recognized that the print space was changing and that the margins that they were used to, the revenue they were used to and the margins, you know, the profit margins they were used to were going away. And that they had, in order to survive, they had storied classic brands that people love and know. They're ubiquitous. And they had to transition, and they did it in 2013. Now, they still put out a print product, and they still do tons and tons of stuff online, and they're, you know, with high journalistic integrity. I mean, just look at Wired and The New Yorker, you know, 2 examples. But they're also highly in the video space because they recognize the shift that was happening. And I think that there are other companies that are moving there. Interestingly, you don't really see it happening, right? I just told you that Condé Nast puts out 4,000 videos a year with 12 billion views. I bet you not many people listening to this know that because you're not seeing a video that says Condé Nast on it. You're seeing a video that says Vogue, you know, that has maybe 50 million views or 100 million views or whatever it's got. You're seeing a TV show from Bon Appetit. Like, you don't realize that the engine behind both of those things is one company.
And you see certain magazines that are dropping print altogether. Glamour has gone that route. ESPN, the magazine, has gone that route. Sports Illustrated is now from a weekly to a monthly. Teen Vogue is the same route. And one thing is also, you have a lot of, I want to mention for Condé Nast, a lot of magazines are really geared towards women. And there's a lot from the pages, obviously with even the advertisers you have among those pages, it's still a very visual medium. So the transition to digital video is a natural evolution, wouldn't it be?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it did happen very organically, and it made a lot of sense. And, you know, Condé and the other publishers were able to take their editors and literally turn their editors into influencers, right? So to use Bon Appetit for an example, you have these editors who are known for cooking up these things in the test kitchen. Well, you know what? It turns out this group of people are very funny. And so you put them on camera and you have them doing these, we have these shows, you know, Gourmet Makes, for example, with Claire Saffitz. This is a very funny show. It can be 10 minutes, 15 minutes, usually around 20 minutes or so. And it is Claire, like looking at Cheetos, for example, looking at the ingredients and then reverse engineering it to try to figure out how to make it herself. And it's the whole process. And it is funny, it's entertaining, it's engaging, and it's a TV show. And Condé has figured out how to do this, whether that show is 7 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes. It's not traditional timelines. It's about story arc, structure, and entertainment.
And the one thing, too, is that with these, you know, I like the fact that there are certain areas now where original content can be made in because right now with the digital disruption, the kind of content you can make, the kind of series you can make, you know, we talked a little earlier about really just breaking the format of how programs need to be produced, how they need to be aired, and what they can become. The digital has changed everything because of the short attention span, because of where people can access the content, and how easy it is to create content that is slick, professional, well done by anybody who's an amateur that's just grassroots, independent, you know, publisher that can build from there. And it's really amazing. But one thing you mentioned also is the amount of money that can be made on advertising. Let's talk about that with digital media. Another area I want to ask about is the paywall. I want to read a real quick note here. This is also from Neiman Knapp. They mentioned this. So, contrary to past assertions that, quote, unquote, the paywall is history, even in a world where most online news remains free at the point of consumption and almost all broadcasters, most digital-born news media, and many newspapers still operate free ad-supported online news models. And a world where more and more subscription services compete for household media's budgets, a significant minority of people are willing to pay for online news. 5 or 10% of the population online subscribe to one or most two sources of digital news, but will not provide the top-line revenues of print at its commercial peak. But with the right systems in place, it will provide a stable and lucrative source of revenue for those who do journalism worth paying for. And I think that's a very important point to come across, because this is something that the broadcasters, the streaming media is going to have to go through the same kind of thing in the same kind of fashion. They're going to have to they're not going to just be able to rely on subscriptions. They're going to have to include ads. Netflix has talked about it. Hulu's talked about it. It's there. And I don't know you had to go through that experience. What do you think the streaming media services are going to have to experience?
You know, if I had the magic 8 ball or the, you know,
yeah.
I wish I do. I would be a very wealthy woman if I did. It's hard to say at this point. You know, I think that the internet started free, and we started off talking about that, right? That was the biggest problem. We introduced free content, and you cannot, once you make it free, it is really hard to walk that back. And Rupert Murdoch recognized that really early on. The Wall Street Journal was one of the first, I think, if not the first, to put up a paywall. He always contended, we will not give this away for free. And I think that might have hurt them in the beginning, and it helps them now. And to your point about good journalism, the New York Times is constantly, just quarter after quarter, announcing that its digital subscriber numbers are growing exponentially and that it's making real dollars off of that. And I know the New Yorker, for example, Condé Nast publication, we have the New Yorker behind a paywall because the audience will pay for good journalism. I think with streaming, it's to be seen how that works. Hulu has 3 different tiers with different levels of advertising on it, right? Netflix has never done advertising and swears it never will. NBC announced recently that Peacock, its streaming service, is going to have an all ad supported. It's going to be all ad supported, right? Very much like its broadcast model. And we're going to find out which one of those works best and what the audience has an appetite for. I think that what I would say in general about this topic is that if you have something that is of value, meaning it's special, then people will pay for it, right? If it's a commodity, meaning they can get it anywhere else, they won't. So take a look at beauty, for example, and fashion, right? You used to pay a lot of money for the fall issue of a beauty publication. Like, that was a big deal. Those things were hundreds of pages thick, like 300, 600 pages. It was massive, right? All of them. And then what happened was Instagram came along, and Snapchat and all of these beauty influencers. And then you've got people like the Kardashians and other celebrities who are on TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram and Twitter and bloggers. And all of a sudden, beauty and fashion have become ubiquitous. They're everywhere. And I wouldn't call it a commodity because you're talking about high fashion, but at the same time, it can be seen anywhere and you don't necessarily need to pay for a magazine to see what's coming up in fashion. Whereas, if you want programming such as Game of Thrones, to use HBO as a really excellent example, or, to use old examples from Netflix, House of Cards and Orange is the New Black, or name any number of things where it becomes like this sort of zeitgeisty, really buzzed about, gotta see it type programming or movie, then you're going to pay for it. It's the same reason why people are paying for the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the New Yorker.
And we're going to hold and continue part 2 of my conversation with Joanna Dodd Massey on next week's program. And I got lucky to record another episode, which I will have available for all of you in 2 weeks. It will be with Joshua Otten. He's the CEO at Ronin Content Services and co-founder of Content Original Productions at Prohibited. So he's a content creator, content provider, and now he started up a brand new over-the-top network for cannabis, which is a networking mobile content platform called Social Club TV. It's already started up. It was started up last year on Pluto TV and other platforms. You can find it to over 100 million homes. But he had now started also a subscription service. We'll talk all about that and really get into the whole thing about content being pitched and pushed out to the streaming media platforms and to cable network and to other providers. We're going to talk all about that coming up on the program next week. Actually, in 2 weeks, we'll do part 2 of Joanna Dodd Massey and that. And then I have some other great interviews I'm trying to get lined up and recorded. But again, the interviews are back. We're back into going full speed ahead here on the Broadcasters Podcast. Remember, folks, by all means, until next week, remember, content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast, presented by BroadcastersPodcast.com and KingofPodcasts.com. The Broadcasters Podcast is brought to you by KingofPodcasts.com/Amazon. If Amazon is good enough for the King of Podcasts, it most certainly is good for you. KingofPodcasts.com/Amazon. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program, The Wrestling is Real Podcast, exclusively at KingofPodcasts.com.